You're listening to another episode of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is the place where you're entitled to Brad's opinion. And now for your host, Brad Allard.
Well, welcome to a special edition of Mr. Allard's Neighborhood. This is a pre-recorded edition since Taylor's in Tennessee enjoying all the sights out in the Smokies. So we thought we'd have a show in his absence. And I thought I'd just talk a little bit about economic things because there's a lot going on. And maybe by the time you see this next week, when after I recorded it, things may be different. So who knows how pertinent this will be. But I hope that you had a good Memorial Day weekend. I hope that everything was good. It's a good day to remember our veterans and those that served and those that gave, as Lincoln called, the last true measure of devotion. So I hope it was a good day for y'all, good weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about the economy just in general, because I have been reading more and more about how there is a recession coming. And what does that mean for us? What does it mean for this state? And what does it mean for this country? I've been spending a lot of time looking at this stuff, and what you're seeing, and now you see in the mainstream media, is a little less skepticism and a little bit more confidence, shall we say, that there is going to be some sort of economic slowdown within the next 12 months. That doesn't mean inflation is going to come down. What we're looking at is a possibility of what us old timers remembered from the 70s as stagflation, which is pretty rough to say the least. But before we jump into all that, let's talk about our sponsors who aren't having a recession, primarily because they advertise here. Well, something like that. Anyway, thank you, Daniel, CrossFit Burleson. Hope you're doing well. We're at 317 Southwest Wilshire. Check out their website, CrossFitBurleson.com. It'll tell you about the training programs, the membership plans, the hours, whatnot. It's a serious workout for serious people, and it'll help you get fit in a hurry. So CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. It's behind I was asked where this exactly was. It's in a large building that's behind Stone Soup and that stretch of strip malls stores there. So look for that there. Also, thank you, Shandy. I had her on earlier this month and last Monday, in fact, and it was a good discussion because she talked to us about what's going on with the real estate market and what's happening with the real estate mortgage rates and how they're rising. By this time, who knows, they may have risen again, because I know the Federal Reserve is meeting sometime soon to raise the rates again, and they're raising them faster than what they had originally planned, which is going to be part of my discussion. So anyway, Shandy will help you find that home here in the Burleson area even before it hits the market. So get a hold of her, and you'll be able to maybe get the inside track on a home here in Burleson, which is about the only way you can get them sometimes. Also, thank you to Rex. If you have questions after the end of the show or even before, talk to him about specifics about your situation, about what your situation requires from the stock market and your 401k, your 403b, your IRA, all these retirement-based plans. I'm not going to give you financial advice. That's what Rex does and has been doing for 35 years. And so hit myfinancialbox.com and get to know him, have some coffee with him, see what he can do for you. Also, thank you to Gayla over at Southern Gym. She's got the great inventory. She's got the repairs, appraisals, design, cleaning, the whole jewelry service. And I just talked to her yesterday, and the expansion plans are on. She should have an expanded store within the next 3 or 4 months, assuming that the supply chain doesn't break down again. And she's staying in the windmill building, and it's going to be in that same windmiller location. So she's not moving location, just expanding because she's doing well. Also, Hotworks over in 731 John Jones and Michelle Humphrey. She's doing well as well. She's got all the plans you want. I have several friends that use Hotworks, and I had several guests that have said great things about Hotworks, but it's got all these various different programs from aerobics and Pilates and rowing and all sorts of things that'll fit what you want, as opposed to just a one style fits all. So go there, check it out. It's a secure place, so you don't have to worry about your personal security while you're working out. So it's a good place to go. Also, we're going to introduce a new sponsor for this summer, Creative Concepts by Mandy. I had Mandy Harden on last Thursday. And last Tuesday. Get your dates right, Dundo. Last Tuesday. And she has a really interesting story. Check out her story on YouTube or on Apple and Spotify. Mandy has been doing this for several years now, and she is a valuable member of our networking group. A lot of people have been using her. I'm using her. She's, as we speak, creating coffee cups and hats for us, and I'm looking forward to that. So, Creative Concepts by Mandy. Check out her website, and she'll be able to maybe help you out with your business promotions. I'm going to talk about two basic things: inflation and recession, which combined together was a term that was created in the 70s for the situation called stagflation. This was a fairly unique event at that time, that we had both high inflation and high unemployment at the same time, because traditionally in our economy, when one is a problem, the other one isn't. Right now, unemployment's not a problem. We're under 4%. However, inflation obviously is a problem. But if we get to a point where inflation starts being such a demand drag, so to speak, that people are just shutting down their spending because of it, it may help a little bit with inflation, because that's what the prescription for inflation is try to slow down the demand side of the situation, but it may cause rising unemployment. And when you get a situation when your inflation rate's over 4 and your unemployment rate's over 4, then you got the recipe for stagflation like you had in the 70s. And the problem with stagflation is if you try to treat one problem, it makes the other one worse, as Jimmy Carter found out. And when Reagan took over back in the early 80s, they took inflation on first, and it was a very severe recession. That the cure for inflation is to create a recessionary situation, which sounds counterintuitive, but basically you're trying to slow down demand. And so what they did in the early 80s, at least the Federal Reserve did, they greatly increased the interest rates. Mortgage rates are like 16 to 17%. Credit card rates are approaching 30%, which greatly reduced spending. And inflation was a real problem for 2 years, but it started coming down. And by the end of Reagan's first term, inflation had been cut about 2/3. It's still fairly high by what we're used to. It's around 6% or something like that. But the economy was noticeably improving, and he won a landslide reelection. But in the midterms, he got hammered because the economy was not doing well. Now, this is what we're looking at here again. The trick of the Fed is trying to do is reduce inflation without causing a recession, and that is very, very difficult to do. Again, not to get too much into my old economics classes, but to reduce inflation, you need to cut down on spending. But when you cut down too much on spending, you're going to start having layoffs and people losing jobs because of lack of demand for their product or service. And it's not like there's a number out there that they can magically hit, or they know in advance what that number is. And so if they go too far with these counter inflation measures, they can cause a recession. If they don't go far enough, then they'll have both. They'll have rising unemployment and still have inflation to deal with. Plus, the fact is, inflation isn't just caused by too much demand. As we've seen, inflation is also caused by supply problems, lack of supply. And that may be outside of the control of our federal government or the Federal Reserve. And so if you have a situation where outside forces cause inflationary pressures like happened in the 70s with the oil embargoes, then you're going to have a real hard time using our tools at our disposal to counteract these problems that are outside our borders. Right now, the two biggest problems are energy costs, of course, not just because of the war in Ukraine, but because of our own policies. And I've talked about that before, but also China is having a slowdown, and they've had a shutdown basically in some of their major cities because of COVID, particularly in Shanghai, where they basically turned that into one big prisoner camp. Nothing's coming out of Shanghai, out of those ports. And we still have archaic union-based rules in our United States ports that prevent us from upgrading our ability to offload ships and get that into the market. We're hamstrung in our major ports in California, New York, et cetera, because of federal laws regarding shipping, union rules that basically prohibit any kind of modernization. And also in California and New York, our two major ports of entry other than New Orleans, we have very strict environmental laws that make it difficult for us to transport the goods out of those ports. And so not all the problems are caused strictly by there's too much money in our economy. That is a problem. So it's odd as that sounds. But also we have problems outside of borders, and they talk about the war in Ukraine. My opinion, the impact of the war in the Ukraine will not be felt until next year, because we're already about to miss a harvest in Ukraine, and and it's going to be planting season very soon, and they won't be able to do it. And we're embargoing Russian wheat. India, which is another major wheat exporter, has basically banned exports of wheat from their country because they're concerned about not having enough for their own population. So we're going to see, I think, very soon, higher and higher food prices caused by these events overseas. And then, of course, here in the United States, our own harvests are being limited by the cost of diesel. I was talking to the king of Kiowa County the other day, my cousin, and he says that diesel is $5.50, and it's very, very difficult to get enough diesel to power the combines and the tractors. It's cutting season right now in Oklahoma and North Texas, and the fuel costs are killing them. So these things are making up for a real perfect storm that will probably land on us. I'm going to say the beginning of 2023, which is what the other smart guys who know what they're talking about say. If and when this happens, it'll be about 6 to 8 months from now. But let's just talk about some of the readings I went through. Get these from the Times, the Post, National Review, Wall Street Journal, the usual sources I go to, also to Bloomberg. I have a couple in there from them. And the point I'm making with all of this is that, let's just talk about inflation first. It's going to be very, very difficult with these factors to take on an inflationary situation. Okay, so let's just go with the first one. I'm talking here, Mr. John Hartley's article, Will the Fed Be Able to Rein in Inflation Without a Recession? And his opinion is good luck, because that's what we're going to need. One of the problems with the inflation rate figure itself is that it does not include housing prices. It includes rent, but it doesn't include housing prices. For various reasons. And so when we talk about the value of homes skyrocketing, that is a separate category altogether from the CPI that's given to us in the middle of the month every month. Now, they do include rents, and rents are seen as a lagging indicator, because as more rents rise, the impact of those higher rents are felt 2 or 3 months later, because that money that's going to rent is not going to other things. And that's that. So one of the main causes of the CPI rise is rental costs. Rental costs have gone through the roof. I'm reading story after story about rent costs being raised about almost like 35 to 40% now annually. And so what happens is, if I have to pay another $500 a month in rent, that's $500 I'm not spending on not just restaurants and partying, but groceries, gas, whatever. And so that's what they call a lagging indicator. But also the biggest driver right now of the CPI, of course, is the fuel costs. And I read the solutions that some of these politicians are coming up with, and I just have to shake my head and said, did they not take Mr. Allard's economics class? For example, New Mexico is sending all their citizens out of the state budget $500 to help with gas costs and inflation. All that does is raise the price even further. Anytime you have a situation where there's too much money and you give them more money, it's throwing kerosene on the fire, because it increases their ability to demand products. It doesn't mean we have more products to buy just because I have $500 more to spend. That's the real problem, is too much money chasing too few goods. And so they think the solution is to here, have some more money. So now I have $500 more to spend on products that haven't expanded in its quantity, and therefore the price will rise. That's basic economics. I teach that like the second week of class. And so I'm talking about these economic factors, and it seems like the politicians just don't even seem to understand what's going on with all this. California is doing the same thing. And people here in Texas, they're asking the Texas politicians, hey, help us with these, rising prices by giving us some money to help with food. Well, there's not going to be that much more bread on the shelf if we give them $500. But anyway, there you are on that one. And here's the real problem with inflation, and unemployment too, for that matter. But I'm focusing on inflation now. It really hammers the poor and the lower middle classes. For the upper classes, upper middle classes, even for those that are doing well, They can absorb some of these higher costs. They can absorb some of these extra expenses, but the poor can't. They don't have the disposable income to shift from one product to another. They're using every bit of their disposable income. Another economics principle I taught them is that the less money you make, obviously, not just the less money you spend, but the more into debt you go. And therefore, you have people that, because of rent, because of fuel, because of food, the burden of inflation is falling most heavily on the poor. And these politicians think they're helping the poor out by giving them more money. That's just a temporary band-aid at best. And I've already described why that's not very effective. But the problem is that when you have a situation where the poor and the middle classes are getting hammered by the inflation rates, they either won't or will not have the wherewithal to continue the spending that's necessary to keep our economy moving. It's not everybody talks about how Elon Musk or, the big multi-billionaire types drive the economy. That's not really true. What really drives our economy is the middle class when it comes to spending. Okay, if I'm Mark Cuban and I got, $2 or $3 billion and I bump up some money paying for a new car, that's wonderful. But there's not very many more Cubans out there. There's millions more middle class people, and these are the people that drive the economy. And when inflation comes about, these are the people that get hurt the most. Now, if they even get more in some ways than the poor, because even if the poor have less disposable income, they also have more government services available to them. Middle class, in most cases, won't have Medicaid. In most cases, they won't have food supplements or housing supplements or anything like that. The middle class is on their own primarily, whereas the poor, I'm not saying they have it great. That'd be ludicrous, but they do have government assets or ability to access the government financial situation or support that maybe the middle class does not have. And rising rents affect the middle class just as much. So does rising gas. So does rising food. So really, the middle class in our economy is what drives it. And when they're hurt the most, even more than the poor are, then we have real economic problems. But also the fact is that when the houses that show the most uh, impact of the higher interest rates are not the multi-million-dollar mansions or the high dollar Highland Park, South Lake Carroll, or South Lake region homes. It's really the middle class and the in the lower working class neighborhoods get hit the most because this is literally their only source of wealth in most cases. Most of these people do not have 401ks, or if they do, they can't access them, of course. They don't have a stock portfolio. They don't have all these other assets, financial or otherwise. Their home is their asset. And when the value of their home rises, their wealth rises. And because they can access that wealth through equity loans and things like that, or equity payouts, they may be able to keep going. But this is their only source of wealth, is that house. And when these housing prices rise to the point that they are now, and the interest rates rise to the point where it kills the market, so to speak, that's again where the middle and working class gets hurt the most because their value of their wealth is stagnating or going down. And as Shandy talked about last week, if you're offering several tens of $1,000s more than what the house is valued at just to get into the house, you're not going to get that value in return at the normal rates of return for another decade or more. So it does tie you down to that house. Now, all that being said, is that that you're going to have a situation where inflation could be a real problem, but also the solutions to those problems are going to fall primarily on the middle class, the higher rates, and things of that nature. Another thing to understand is that right now, because of the situation, credit debt is rising. Use of credit cards primarily, also installment debts. But credit card debt's what I'm focusing on the more. A lot of people are financing themselves month to month with credit cards and not paying them off. I mean, their debt balances are accumulating, and we all know that the rates really accumulate quickly. The interest accumulates very quickly on a credit card, and probably no type of interest rate is more sensitive to changes by the Fed than interest card credit rates. Yes, the housing mortgage rates will rise, and so will car loan interest rates rise, but interest rates on credit cards and other types of installment debt like that is going to be very high. You're looking at credit card rates like in the 30s again, 25 to 30%. And since what happens quite often, the reason why a lot of the economists think a recession's coming is that right now people are financing the higher gas, the higher food, whatever with credit cards. But sooner or later, either their budget or their credit limits are going to prevent them from continuing that kind of expenditure, and they're going to have to cut back. And to cut back in spending may bring down some prices, but it's going to cause a recession. Basically, I mentioned something called a lagging indicator. Credit card rates are another lagging indicator because it may temporarily boost up spending and give good numbers to a corporate balance sheet or profit and loss statement. But sooner or later, you're going to quit spending because either you have everything you need or you don't. You can't afford everything you need. And historically, this is one of the biggest basic causes of the Great Depression in 1929. We were doing everything on credit. And then finally, when we had enough, radios and Model Ts, we quit spending. The market tanked. People were left owing money that they couldn't pay back because they'd put their money in the stock market and lost it. Also, that their unemployment prefigured the Great Depression by about 3 or 4 months. It started to drop in the summer of 1929, and in October it all came tumbling down. Is that going to happen this time next year? Maybe not to the same degree because we have mechanisms in the market that can prevent some of that from happening, and we have a social safety net that we didn't have in 1929. But on that point, some of the same conditions are brewing right now that were in the late 20s were so significant. That's one reason why I think we're heading to a recession in about a year, because you look at the conditions and say, I've seen this before. Now, again, I want to emphasize that we have tools at our disposal that we've created or actually just really got serious about using. And so I'm not saying we're going to go to the Great Depression, but we could have something similar to what happened in 2008. Because another thing is that we have, I was reading another one, I'm trying to find the article in particular in my stack of readings, is about what's happening with the housing prices. He said, the gentleman I'm reading here, this is from New York Times, talks about what you're having is the housing prices are sooner or later going to turn. They're going to start receding or slowing down in appraised value and asking price and whatever else. Sooner or later, it has to. And you're going to have a lot of people that have overspent on their houses. And they may or may not have the sufficient income to maintain those payments. This is similar to what happened in 2008. Now, again, the guys I'm reading here about the housing situation, the housing bubble, say it shouldn't be as bad as 2008, where it just collapsed entirely, not because of just of the market, but because of also a lot of predatory lending practices and people that were getting credit that shouldn't have. That has been curtailed to some degree. So you don't have the same level of that, but you're still going to have a marketing slowdown, a housing slowdown, and in some areas of the country, a decline. And people have overinvested in their houses, and now they're going to have to pay them off with less assets. And so there's a problem with that. Now I'm reading here in New York Times. This is a pretty interesting article because it talks about some of the quotes I've been reading about the possibility of inflation and recession coming. And what was happening about 3 months ago, most people, particularly in the administration or their allies, were saying, oh, it's just, alarmist talk. We're not going into recession. The economy's improving. Look at the job market. Look at all the job openings and whatever else. But now you're getting more and more either nonpartisan or even Democrat affiliated economists saying, not only is it a real possibility, but we need to prepare for it. And I'll quote a couple of people in particular on that. I'm looking for one. There's an article here I'm ready here. I want to make sure I get to, because it really was really point. Here it is. I got it. I'll get to it when we can. This article here in the New York Times, I'm going to be saying, here's a gentleman named Mark Zandi. Now, Mark Zandi is the chief economist at Moody's. Moody's is the premier credit rating agency for major corporations and for municipalities, states, and sovereign nations. I mean, they're the credit rating that people go by. There's Fitch and there's Standard and Poor's, but Moody's is seen as the go-to for credit ratings for corporate America and for uh, political units like states, et cetera. And right now, like, for example, the state of Texas has a very good, strong Moody's rating, which makes it easier for us to sell bonds. It makes it more attractive for investment, for businesses, whatever else. And then you get something like Illinois, which has almost junk bond status because of their financial situation, their massive, massive debts they have in their state budget. But anyway, here's Mark Zandi, who is a former advisor to the Barack Obama administration. Recession risks are high, uncomfortably high, and rising. For the economy to navigate through without suffering a downturn, we need some very deft policymaking from the Fed and a bit of luck. Well, that's very reassuring. We're going to need some deft policymaking, which the Biden administration has shown no clue for, absolutely none. Many of the solutions they're talking about for inflation just make things worse. And their continual strangulation of the energy markets in this country have caused a great deal of the supply problem. They want to blame Putin and they want to blame the pandemic. And yes, those are factors, but we are also making those factors much, much worse by our own policies. Also, the Fed. I was talking with Rex Russell, my financial guy here on the show, whom I hope you use. And he and I both agreed that the Federal Reserve's response to this whole situation has been slow, weak, and ineffective. They came out about 2 months ago and said, "Yep, inflation is a problem, and we were too slow to act on it." So they admitted their own fault. Jerome Powell has been a disaster as the chair, and his predecessor, Janet Yellen, who is now the Treasury Secretary for Mr. Biden, has not been much better in her position. But the idea that the Fed is going to be able to take care of this problem, they haven't shown that so far. And what they had to do is they should have started raising rates about 6 months ago. And now they're trying to play catch up. And they're wrenching up the market rates more quickly than is good for the economy to adjust to. And it's almost like they're slamming the brakes on after speeding all this time. And it's causing disruptions in the credit markets. The one thing credit markets hate more than anything else is uncertainty. Higher rates they can adjust to if they're done over a certain period of time with certain warning, with certain accommodations, but but when they're done in haste, it wrenches up the markets pretty badly and makes the credit markets in chaos. And so, and this other part here, deft policymaking from the Fed and a bit of luck. When we're relying on luck to help us with the economy, we're going to be in real trouble. Here's another one. This gentleman here is Lloyd Blankfein. He's the used to run Goldman Sachs. I'll read this one. This week alone, former Goldman Sachs chief executive Lloyd Blankfein warned of a very, very high risk of recession. Also, Wells Fargo CEO Charlie Scharf said there was, quote, no question that the economy is heading toward a downturn. And former Fed Chair Ben Bernanke cautioned that the country could be poised for stagflation, a slowing economy combined with high inflation. So here you have some people that have credibility, and they're hardly partisan Trumpers or Reaganites or whatever you want to call it. Blankfein worked for the Obama administration in various capacities. I have no idea about Mr. Scharf. Bernanke was the chair of the Fed prior to Janet Yellen, so he served under both Obama and Trump. And so these people are unaffiliated or even maybe in some way connected to the current administration, and they're saying it's coming. And that's a concern, to say the least. So I'm looking at these gentlemen here quoting, saying it's coming, and they all pointing not to tomorrow or not to June, but they're talking about maybe this time next year. That the stagflationary situation is going to be felt probably in the spring of 2023 because the way things are heading right now. Right now, we're not in a recession, obviously, but we are in high inflation, highest in 40 years. And so, but they say the elements are there to cause this problem in about anywhere from 8 to 10 months. But before we jump to 8 to 10 months, let's do these sponsors now. I don't want to wait 8 to 10 months. Let's talk about these people. Our Place. I was there twice last week. Great service, great food as always. It's always a good experience there. The wait staff is friendly, personable. Food is great. Atmosphere is good. It's I took a gentleman last week who was there for the first time because he doesn't live in this area, and he was very impressed with it. And he said, this is a good place to come. He might come back if he comes back into the area. Our Place is a good place to do business as well. So anyway, on the highway in Ellsbury, he's been there since 1986. Also, thank you to Chris over at Wild Cigar and Culture. They got big plans. I'm sure they had a great Memorial Day weekend. But they always have some things going on. I know they have a 4th of July celebration being planned for that patio area they have. They have a great humidor for cigars. Get yourself a cigar or a gift card for somebody who does like cigars. Have a drink. You can watch the game or talk to people. It's quiet. It's a good place to do business. A lot of people are finding out about this place because it's a place they can go like an early afternoon and talk over business, without a lot of hassle. And it's a good place to do that kind of thing. So thank you, Chris, for your support. Thank you to Antonio Basallo at proactivepaymentsolution.com. He'll help you with your point of sales operations. He'll help you with the streamline your whole online operations, payments, invoice, etc. So it can handle all of that for you. Because if you're setting up a business or if you're trying to do this all by yourself, talk to Antonio. He'll get you the right program, get you the right payment rates for the PO point of sales operations, and so you'll be able to maybe not just save a little money, but also save a little time, which we know is money. So Proactive Payment Solutions, thank you. Also, thank you to Tiffany, Local Life Magazine. It should be out this week. I know she's very busy. She's got a graduating daughter. I think, we've been all keeping up with the saga on Facebook. It's been kind of fun. Local Life Magazine is out. Also, Local Life TX is up and running. As always, you can check out the specials on that, the discounts, the coupons, whatnot. Find out what's going on in Burleson. She knows what's going on. I'm going to have her on the show pretty soon because she always knows what's going on in the summertime, and it's going to be great. So thank you, Tiffany, for your help and support. All right, back to the good news. Boy. Also, here's something else that rising interest rates do. And I'm going to try to get too technical about it because, when I taught this subject in high school, most high school kids, it's interesting about them is they intuitively understand what's happening to them on an economic basis. They just don't know the mechanics of it. They know what higher prices are doing because they react to it. In fact, there's a whole field of economic thought called rational expectations theory that basically says that people, even with a limited economic understand economics better than they think they do because they react to what they think is going to happen. And if they think a recession is going to happen, they'll act accordingly. And it may or may not cause a recession to come, but people will react to it. And right now, the majority of American people think the economy is heading in the wrong direction. I mean, a large majority think it's heading in the wrong direction, and they're acting accordingly, cutting back on spending, whatnot, cutting back on hiring. Okay, some of the major hiring operations like Amazon is now cutting back on their hiring, and not just cutting back, but laying off people. Now, all the small firms I know and deal with here in Burleson need help, but that's not going to last forever. And this is a point I would make to some of the people who are taking a sabbatical from the workforce. You better get in it pretty quick because there's going to come a point where those help wanted signs are going to come down, not because they filled the jobs, because they can't offer those jobs anymore. And so if these people out in here in the great American countryside are waiting for whatever, higher wages or, 3-week paid vacation or whatever they think is entitled to them, that's great. But sooner or later, those jobs are not going to be offered anymore because the employers won't be able to afford to offer them anymore. And, I don't think I've driven by any kind of retail or restaurant establishment in this town that did not have now hiring sign, help wanted, things of that nature. And you'll know we're in a recession when we don't see those signs anymore. Because again, it's not that they filled those jobs. They're just not going to be jobs to be open anymore. here's another economic concept we need to stress. Rising interest rates cause our dollar values to rise in relation to foreign currencies. In other words, the dollar gets stronger. Why? The simplest answer I give you is that as the interest rates rise here in the United States, foreign currency buyers and investors will invest in the United States because they're getting a better rate of return here than they do in their home countries. And so the demand for the dollar goes up. The dollar is a commodity like anything else. It is subject to supply and demand pressures. The more money there is, the less it's worth. The more demand there is, the more it's worth. Okay. And you have the strong and the weak dollar. A weak dollar is one in which the value of our currency is lower in comparison to foreign currencies. The stronger one is that it's worth more. And what that means is that as Americans with the stronger dollar, we can buy imported products more cheaply. But it also means that foreign markets, it costs them more to buy American products. So a strong dollar kills our exports. Okay, so when the dollar gets too strong, American made products become more expensive overseas and they buy less of it. Whereas the products they're making become cheaper by extension and we buy more of it. And so our net export, which has been in the negative zone for decades, it just gets even worse. So those companies here in the United States that depend on exports are hurt by a strong dollar. And you say, well, how about those companies that depend on imports? Or those institutions that, like having foreign money come into the United States, like at Disney World, for example, a weak dollar means good things for them because foreign visitors will go to Disney World. Well, that's all great. If our dollar gets stronger, it makes their stuff more expensive. That doesn't mean that they, like China, for example, have the products we want to buy at a cheaper rate if we can't get those products. If they're still stuck in a port out in the ocean somewhere out in Los Angeles, or still stuck in Beijing or Shanghai, it doesn't matter how affordable those products would be if they're not here. And that's the real problem. Okay? I- as- we don't want a dollar that's so weak that stuff that we depend on that's made in foreign countries becomes too expensive. We want that balance between a strong and a weak dollar. But overall, we want a dollar that basically, as best we can, has a more or less even trade balance, which again we haven't had in years. But the point is that as our dollar gets stronger, it gets harder and harder and harder to sell our stuff overseas. And it may sound like it will be easier to buy Chinese or Indian or Central American made goods, not if they're not available, not if they're stuck in ports, not if they're stuck by tariffs, not if they're stuck by embargoes. And so we get the worst of both worlds. Our exports are hurt and we don't have access to the imports. That's what a stronger dollar is doing to us right now. Also, we are dependent upon foreign economies, and China is going through recession right now. There's no questions. The Chinese statistics have always been dubious at best, and they've always been it's always been a we take it with a grain of salt when they tell us about their great growth. But there's no question right now China has significant economic problems, worse than ours, in fact. I could do a whole show on Chinese economic problems one day. But, and we may say, well, great, we can take the advantage of that. Well, we're so tied into their economy for sourcing of our supplies and electronics and as the microchip episode has shown, or the baby formula episode has shown, because we get a lot of it from them, that we, a Chinese economy that crashes is not going to be good for us. And it's going to cause us problems here. Now we could blame ourselves for that, but that'd be ridiculous because we trade overall is a beneficial thing. That's another discussion too. I don't want to take up all the time on economic data, but whatever. Here's a quote I ran across from Janet Yellen. Okay, she says that the slower growth and inflation are having stagflationary effects. However, she is optimistic the central bank could contain inflation without causing recession. But she acknowledged the ability to do so was far from clear. I think it's conceivable there could be a soft landing. It requires both skill and luck. I hope that's the case, but this is a very difficult economic situation. This is from the Treasury Secretary of Joe Biden, that we're in a very difficult economic situation. And she's relying on skill and luck for a quote soft landing, which Jerome Powell has said, whatnot. Zandy here, I'll quote him again. He says he puts the odds of a U.S. recession in the next 24 months at about 50%. We are traveling close to the edge, he said. The housing market is the next thing that's going to roll over. The question is just how hard. This is the quote I was looking for earlier, that about the housing market, but he says about 50%. And now that's serious enough. But we're talking about also the other factors that are looking at it. The Joe Biden right now is advertised the fact that we're going to have a lower deficit than was projected. Yes, we will. Our deficit will have declined to $1 trillion in 2021. It was 1.6 the previous year. Now it's $1 trillion. And they're saying that that's going to go back up in the next couple of years. He said this decrease in the deficit in the budget to $1 trillion, which is a staggering thing to say, that we're declining to $1 trillion. The Zandy and the others say, well, it's going to go back up in the next couple of years because of the government's, not just the requirements and obligations, but also the interest rates they're paying on their own bonds. That's a whole other topic. I'm going to get to that in a second. But also their own costs, and also their own safety net programs and other, welfare programs, whatever else, food safety and security, housing security, et cetera, as they call it. They're all going to go up. And so we're talking about, we're going to have another kick back up to $1.6 trillion like we had during the pandemic years. Let's talk a minute about what interest rates do for the government and does for bondholders. Okay, here's the deal. When the government issues bonds, they issue them at pretty low rates. Okay, and people will buy them because they're the safest investment in the world. The government will pay off the debts, even if they have to print the money to do it. They'll pay off the bond interest payments. So the chance of default is very, very low. And so people around the world will buy U.S. bonds. Now, they may not be getting great interest rates, but getting security. And what we get in return is we get access to this foreign money that's being lent to us at very, very cheap cost. But when the interest rates start rising, that cost goes up, and it becomes even a bigger portion of our federal budget. Right now, the federal budget, I'm guessing from last I read, about $350 billion a year goes to interest on the debt, that $28 trillion national debt. When the rates rise, the portion of that budget that pays off the interest on those bonds goes up and up and up. It's not going to roads and the military or grandma. It's going to bondholders that go all over the world, but also bondholders such as you and I, bondholders such as my teacher pension fund, bondholders such as every state and local institution has an account for bonds. Every bank has ownings of U.S. securities. So it isn't just some fat cats. That's very much a misunderstanding of the bond markets. People think the Chinese own all the bonds. No, American people own about 10 times as much as the Chinese do. But that's another story right there, another show. But anyway, as the rates go up, that means the government has to pay higher interest rates to get those bonds to be sold. The other effect of higher interest rates on bonds is that the bonds I already own are at a rate that's below what's being offered. Okay, they're below what's being offered, and therefore, if I want to unload my bonds for cash, I'm going to have to take a discount in order to sell them. I'm going to have to discount them to get somebody to buy my bond at the lower rate that my bonds have. So, for example, I have $10,000 in bonds that are paying 3.5%. Interest rates rise, and then the current rate somebody can get by buying a brand new bond, so to speak, is 5%. If I want to sell my $10,000 bonds, I'm going to have to sell them for like $8,500. I'm going to take a discount. I'm going to take a cut, because why would anybody buy my 3.5% bonds when they could get 5% bonds? And so if I want to load my lower interest rate bonds, I'm going to have to lower the price I would be willing to part with them at. And so I lose money. And so every time they raise interest rates, the bond values in our portfolios declines. And that's one reason why interest rates, in my opinion, what I taught for years, interest rates to me is the single most important indicator of where this economy is heading. The single most important one. Everything revolves around interest rates, not just bank loans, car loans, house loans, credit card loans, but also bond values. And we don't think about that very much because we don't buy and sell routinely like, bond traders do. But if you're, a retired person and you've got $100,000 worth of bonds and they're all paying off at 2 and 3%, the value of those bonds is less than $100,000 if you ever wanted to unload it. You'll get your 2 or 3% every quarter, but you're not going to get return value on the face value of those bonds. So that's one reason why the interest rates are so critical. Just kind of a few odds and ends. I'm reading Wall Street Journal here. Wall Street Journal says that most forecasters don't see the slump starting until at least late 2022, with most projections pointing to 2023 as the year progresses. Here's an article also a long one in the Wall Street Journal I had yesterday that was talking about my dollar value situations. Also here in the Bloomberg article talks about what the lagging indicator of credit card debt is doing, because they're saying that because of the use of credit cards, the outlook for the economy is getting worse and worse. And you can't underestimate the value of expectations and outlook. Another thing I taught in my economics class was that expectations have a way of becoming true. People think something's going to happen, they act accordingly, and it happens. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If everybody thinks the stock market's going to decline, they sell, causing the stock market to decline. If they think an asset is going to go up in value, they buy, and the asset goes up in value. But right now, because of higher interest rates, because of higher housing prices, because of higher food costs, because of stuff like I'm telling you right now that people are paying attention, their outlook for the economy is very, very grim. And so they're starting to act accordingly. And that's going to be a trigger for a recession. Again, I want to emphasize this point. The expectations of the American people are a very critical component. Every month they take a poll about consumer opinion, consumer feelings. What's their attitude about the economy? Consumer sentiment, and it's the lowest it's been since right after the 2008 crash. So people are expecting something to happen, and maybe listening to Mr. Allard's Neighborhood, that's just going to reinforce that. As far as Mr. Biden is concerned, you can forget it. First of all, it's very, very difficult for any president just to turn the economy around just like that. It took Reagan, along with a very obstinate Federal Reserve, it took him about 3 years to get inflation under control at a great deal of pain. Mr. Biden has shown no inclination to take a great deal of pain. But back in the early 80s, it was a very difficult time to get rid of the inflation and get the unemployment problem under control. Dark times. Mr. Biden will not abide dark times, nor will his Democrat Party, because they got a midterm coming up. So the painful, necessary things that need to be done, I don't think this administration has the wherewithal to do it. Second of all, many of the things are outside their control. I grant them that. They can't control what's happening in China and COVID. The war in Ukraine is an impact on our economy. Pandemic was, I don't think it is as much anymore, but the pandemic is still got some impact on it. But still, the point is that Mr. Biden has shown no ability to comprehend the problem, as much less solve it. And Congress thinks, the Democrats in Congress anyway, think the solution is throw more money at it. The Republicans in Congress think, let's cut taxes. Well, those are both inflationary measures. So I don't think our Congress has got a grip on this. The Federal Reserve, by their own admission, was late to the game. Now, the federal government doesn't have a great deal of control over the Federal Reserve's decision making, but they trusted Jerome Powell too much, and he was too late. And I really think with the politics coming up, and with the midterms coming up, I just don't see the parties in power at state and national level doing anything to risk their possibilities in that election. So I think we're in for a fairly significant 2023. And you're going to hear a lot of wackos on either side saying we need to cut taxes to zero or give them money. And that's just neither one of those is going to happen. Particularly, you're going to hear a lot more, I think, on the Democratic Party about increased relief and increased aid, and that's just throwing a lot of fluid on it. So there you go. Well, I hope you are reasonably educated on this. Look forward to your comments. We're taking a kind of a slow week in the first week of June because of Taylor's vacation with his family. So this may be the only show for the week unless something amazing, critical, terrible, wonderful happens. And then maybe we could try to rig something up as he's out in Tennessee. But we're going to take a slow week in the first week of June. So I hope you share this show with your friends, ponder it, tell me if I'm right or wrong or full of it, or the wisest man you ever heard of, which I'm not quite sure that'd be the truth, but whatever. I appreciate y'all listening, and let's run through the sponsors and thank them because they make all this possible. Thank you, Daniel, CrossFit Burleson, 317 Southwest Wilshire. I hope you're doing well. Get to know his trainers and his programs on CrossFitBurleson.com and see about joining and getting in shape. Also, thank you to Shandy. We talk about housing and the mortgage rates. Listen to the show. It's on Apple and Spotify. There we go. Apple and Spotify. It's also on YouTube. And so, and also Mr. Allard's Neighborhood Facebook page, but mostly it's an Apple and Spotify. Go check it out, and because you'll need somebody to help you navigate this market. And speaking of markets, call Rex if you have questions. I'm not going to tell you to buy, sell, or do nothing about the stock market. I'm not going to tell you to buy, sell, or do nothing about bond markets. That's where Rex will do, and he can do it. He's been doing it 35 years. So hit myfinancialbox.com, hit the links, find out what he's got to do for you, what he's got to offer, and have a little coffee with him, and he'll help you through this troubled period as I keep hearing in all the stupid commercials. Anyway, also thank you to Gala. Hope you had a good weekend. Southern Gym is open right now, so go and check out the jewelries and the savings and the deals. It's June. It's wedding month. It's a lot of anniversaries are in June, so check out her inventory or other types of services, and you'll be glad you did. Thank you to Michelle Humphrey over at Hotworks. She's doing pretty well, apparently, and I like to tell her it's because she advertises here, but she also works really, really hard at it. So she is a ball of energy. So, and probably she gets that from her infrared workouts. And so go check them out. It's a secure environment. It's a clean environment, absolutely clean. She gets it taken care of probably more than is required even, but she does it quite often. So it's a great place to work out. And with the infrared system, it makes it more effective. Thank you to our new sponsor, Mandy Harden, over at Creative Concepts. You look at to promote your business, cups, hats, T-shirts, banners, table spreads. I saw, tablecloths, all that. She has a whole bunch of stuff. She could do whatever you need, really. So Creative Concepts by Mandy. Check out her webpage. She'll get a hold of you, and y'all can work out some kind of deal. We're getting some swag very soon from her. I'm looking forward to that. Also, thank you to Otto, of course, over at our place. A great deal as always. He's a great community citizen, good place to do business. So on the highway and Allsbury, you've been there, you know it, you love it. Okay, thank you to Chris over at Wild Cigar. It's a good place to go and have a gentleman or a adult afternoon. It's for nice quiet atmosphere, no hollering, no yelling, no hair pulling. And get you smoke, get you drink, get you a little business meeting going on. They have rooms for that. They have a patio outside. It's really nice. So it's a good place to go. Also, thank you, Antonio, at the Point of Sales Operations, Proactive Payment Solutions. Hope you're doing well. Hit proactivepaymentsolution.com and help you with your online business operations, particularly at the point of sales, better rates, better programs with Antonio. And thank you to Tiffany over at Local Life Magazine. It should be out this week. I'll have her on in a couple of weeks when she's kind of decompressed from all the graduation routine, and we'll talk about what's going on this summer in Burleson. Also, next week, this will be the last show before maybe the week, but next week, beginning next Monday, we're going to have Gabrina Solis on with the Chamber of Commerce. We're going to talk about their activities. They got a fundraiser, an event coming up pretty soon over at Southern Oak, and they have all sorts of activities going on. Also, a week after that, I have the mayor on, and we're going to be talking about not just the aftermath of the bond election, but we're going to be talking about some of the specific projects that I keep hearing about that's a cause of conversation, let's say, in Burleson, and see what's going on with the city and the response to that. Hope you're doing well, Taylor, out there in the hinterland of Tennessee, and we will see y'all next time.